Welcome to Scary Story Podcast. In these two stories, you'll get to experience what it's like to have an unexpected jokester roaming in your own home, as well as some of the consequences of some major sleeping problems. My name is Edwin. Here's a scary story. The light from my cell phone blinded my right eye when I checked the time. 4 a.m. once again, and Millie was running around from one end of the hall to the other. I barely remember this, but my aunt told me that I was in the house when Millie fell down the stairs and fractured her rib. But I must have been 12 years old, which would make my cousin Millie about 4 years old when she fell. Poor girl. Nobody believed her story, and even sadder, I couldn't recall any of it. Not consciously, anyway. I was expecting to hear something tumbling down the stairs this time too, just when she stopped running. The stillness for those few seconds was getting uncomfortable. But instead of those random thuds and knocks against the wooden staircase after that long pause, I just heard whispered laughter. From what I knew, only Millie and Grandma were going to be there that night. Lots of things ran through my mind. Sleepwalking, Tina, her best friend, sleeping over, her making some video for Instagram or something, who knows. But since my aunt had begged me to stay at the house for that week to take care of it and watch after Grandma, I even wondered if she had asked me to be there in case of a break-in or something. If that was a concern of hers, she would have told me about it, though. Too many thoughts at 4:04 a.m. I sighed and rolled to the edge of the bed, the springs of it making it extremely obvious that I was moving around, and the footsteps against the floorboards above me were scared off. I had no idea where they were or where they were going, even though the house would squeak and I'd be able to pinpoint the exact location of people above me. That's how I chased down the dog and put him outside again all those times. Oh, the dog. Yes, the steps matched the dog's. Millie had likely snuck in Gumby again. I pressed the button on my phone to see that another 4 minutes had passed of me just sitting at the edge of the bed in the dark, looking toward the wall when I innocently decided to put my head down against the warm blankets and, once again, with the noisy sound of the bed echoing in the back of my mind, I fell asleep. In my dreams, I could still hear those footsteps, but I didn't completely wake up the rest of the morning. The sound of frying bacon sounds just like rain. Do you ever notice that? Or maybe your grandma doesn't cook enough to feed an entire family when there's only 3 people in the house. Grandma says that young men need to eat more in order to grow strong, so she did her best to build a mountain of food on my plate. Obviously, she was knocking on my door promptly at 7:30 in the morning, opening the door to let in those sounds and smells. I told her I'd be ready soon, and she dragged her shoes in double time to the kitchen, while I sat there on the edge of the bed looking for my shoes. I got on one knee to look under the bed, but the shoes weren't there. I stretched as far as I could to look around the corner of the bed, but the shoes were gone. Had I taken them off somewhere? I opened up my bag and got out my shower flip-flops and walked straight to use the bathroom. I told Grandma about my shoes while I was sitting at the table, and she looked concerned, as she always did, and went to my room to flip through things. If you haven't noticed by now, there was no sense of privacy with her. She opened up doors, bags, drawers. It was normal for her. Yet she always gave you the sense that you weren't being judged. I've always gotten that from Grandma, even as a kid, when I'd get cuts or itchiness in strange places. She just fixed things and moved on. I was working my way through the breakfast plate when Grandma walked to the kitchen with her old phone and set it down next to her stool, telling me that she would call my mother later, that she couldn't find my shoes, but that they would turn up very soon. There was no need to call my mom about that. I mean, they were just shoes, and I wasn't some kid crying over his missing toys or anything. But I never argued with Grandma, so she leaned forward to grab the remote control and turn up the volume of the talk show she was watching on television. I got to 3/4 of the plate, disappointing Grandma in the process, and then I took a few scraps of bacon out to Gumby, who was out by the doghouse biting at his paws before running up to me, wagging his tail. My smile faded as I thought about last night. I turned back inside toward Grandma, the dog's face now licking the welcome mat right outside the kitchen door. Grandma, did the dog sleep outside? Yes, your aunt had a doorstop installed a few months ago, you know. I told her it wouldn't help, but at least it keeps a dog out. Yeah, I said. I was wondering what in the world Grandma was thinking. What else was it supposed to keep out? The dog had been sneaking inside at night, digging through the trash and rolling around the carpet for years. Nobody knew how the dog managed to get inside. I used to think that Gumby was just an escape artist dog, and just very smart. I was not expecting to find out that someone, or something, was letting him inside. Millie came strolling down to the living room while I was on my phone asking me what I was doing. The park across the street from her house had a river, and we had a thing we would do every year whenever I visited ever since she was a little kid. I found it fun too, just throwing rocks at the shallow river. We were into making paper boats for a while, but Millie got home soaked one day after falling in, and since then, we just sort of avoided it. It was embarrassing for her to bring up, and it was difficult for me to think about it without laughing at the way she slid into the water in slow motion. Anyway, she suggested that we go. I grabbed my jacket and instinctively went to the room to get my shoes when I remembered that they were gone. I stood by the open door wondering what I'd do for the rest of the weeks I was going to be spending there. I heard Millie from the living room say something and then run upstairs. I went inside the room and sat on the edge of my bed. Where could my shoes be? Then Millie showed up at the door, my pair of old sneakers in one hand. How did you do that? I asked her. I didn't, she said, turning and heading toward the front door by the living room. Where were they? I asked, trying to catch up. Millie completely ignored my question and opened the door, yelling to Grandma that we were going to be at the park. Grandma called your mom, she told me while we were still crossing the front yard. She said you should probably lock the door to your room, though I'm pretty sure Samuel can still get in. Samuel? I stopped Millie by the sleeve of her hoodie. I don't know what his name is, I just call him that, she said. Remember? I didn't ask more questions. Millie was always a little weird. And even though she's my cousin and we get along great, never really understood her. Most of our conversations were just joking around or making fun of the noises her mom and grandma made around the house. That and a few TV shows that we both liked. But to answer her question, yes, I remembered. Vaguely. You know, back when Millie was little, she had a lot of trouble sleeping. Oddly enough, I remember a lot of those things in distant memories here and there, though I dream about them sometimes too. Millie crying all the time, me having to spend a lot of time at her house along with my own mother for weeks at a time. Dad having to pick me up and drive me to school every day. Dad didn't explain much to me, and I could tell Mom was worried all the time. So I made the most of it on my own, chatting with my friends online and watching the DVDs that my dad would rent for me every single day. It was while I was watching one of those movies that Grandma got visibly upset and demanded that I stop it, that I send it back to my dad. I didn't understand back then, but things were much clearer now. Millie had been woken up almost daily by something she described as a tiny man with a hat, back when she was younger. She would cry until someone else came in the room when she was a baby. When she was old enough to speak and describe him, she said that he was an old man who asked to play, that he'd bring his own set of games, dice, cards, and wooden blocks, sticks, bones, and seeds. But Millie couldn't see him anymore. Now, all we'd experienced were his pranks, usually hiding things from us or letting the dog inside. Well, while he could. Things didn't get too serious, except for the staircase or the candle incident. But that's a tale for another day. Those memories came back, slowly, of just how scared everybody was back then. That there was some sort of safety in knowing that you couldn't walk out into the hallway and see him randomly. But I wasn't so sure. Most nights, when I couldn't fall asleep, I'd hear those footsteps in the hallway coming from upstairs. I was always too afraid to turn my head when I heard those taps on my window. Because even though I knew, somehow, that I wouldn't see him, I didn't want to risk finding out if Samuel actually wanted to be seen. Sleeping problem. Mom has these sleeping pills that she uses sometimes, and after hearing me complain over and over about being unable to sleep, she offered that I take some. They're not prescribed or anything, just some that you can get over the counter. And supposedly they won't form a habit, but something strange happened the 2 nights that I took them. In order to better understand what happened, let me tell you what a typical night for me looks like. See, I work from home most days, but at night I had the worst time falling asleep. I did everything that I found on websites recommending ways to sleep better. Things like clean sheets, warm blankets, layers, comfortable pillows, a mattress that is adjusted to me, and sleeping in complete darkness. Those are the usual ones. Then I've tried things on other reputable websites, things like certain rituals to fall asleep, like drinking tea with no caffeine, avoiding turning on the television, computers, phones. Okay, the list goes on and on forever. But then we forget that there's another side to the internet. See, my habits had gotten the best of me. I tried everything, including trying to sleep without an alarm or notifications, with earplugs, everything. My days would start with a big headache after not being able to fall asleep. I had done sleep studies at a hospital once, and I was clear from any sleeping problems, blaming the situation primarily on stress. But then the doctors blamed my sleeping environment, because during the sleep studies I was able to sleep well, so that didn't show them anything. I was tired of not being able to fall asleep, and it was upsetting. Plus, it made me super moody. Every single morning, I took the same 2 cups of coffee just to get me awake, but in the worst mood you can imagine. Nobody liked to be around me, and yes, I'd complain about everything all the time. One of my coworkers from my online job said that maybe I should try something that worked for her sister's sleeping problem. And that's where the strange website comes in. It was a link to a translated website about sleep, and what appeared to be some historic information and diagrams on techniques to summon entities for protection. These companions, as they call them, guard you while you sleep, and even though it sounds a bit out there for most people, the theory behind it made sense to me at the time. Even if it wasn't scientific or the results ended up being completely in my head, as long as I had some relief, I was happy to give it a try. The page had a shop that would let you order one of their kits with a form to be contacted by a person who would assign you a protector. The process was surprisingly professional, and the person I talked to was nice, and answered possibly some of the worst and strangest questions any customer had ever asked her before. She asked me things about my household, colors I decorate with, and personalities of my best friends. Also specific instructions for a protector. When I heard about the rules that I had to set, I became a little hesitant, but I don't know what it is about me and salespeople. I feel bad after taking so much of their time and not buy anything. Honestly, I thought based on the site's appearance that I'd get a person in a foreign accent trying to get my credit card number or something like that. But these rules I had to set for the protector were very specific, and it made me wonder if this could actually be true. See, basically a spirit would guard your home at night and shoo away any negative spirits or haunts that might be keeping you awake or causing stress in your space while you're trying to sleep. In case you're wondering, I didn't believe in this stuff. It was just a thing that I wanted to try to see if I could bring peace of mind simply by placebo effect or something. You know, like when you take a medicine that might be only water, but it somehow still makes you feel better. So I got the kit in the mail, and it was a piece of paper with instructions. There was also a little bottle of sand with a cork and 4 stones of the same bluish color. The instructions said to write down a set of rules, roll it up, and pack it inside of the bottle of sand. The spirit would start making itself known in the following weeks. The stones were to be placed on the corners of the room. But weeks passed and no spirit made itself known, whatever that meant. The room always felt warmer to me, though. But the end of the winter was approaching, and that made sense. Eventually, I did start being able to fall asleep better. On some nights, I would sleep all night without waking up, and I'd feel energized and happy the following day. But other nights, I just felt worse than before. That's when I mentioned it during one of my phone calls to Mom that I was having trouble sleeping, and she recommended that I use some of her pills. I really wish I hadn't. See, another thing about them is that they can give you nightmares, and I sincerely hope to this day that they were only dreams. The first night, I started feeling drowsy about half an hour after I took them and went to bed, trying to summon enough energy to take off my shoes and change into my pajamas, which I miraculously managed to do in one go. I got the bed ready and fell asleep immediately, but that didn't last very long. I was in my room, and under me was the sound of a roaring animal, like a lion or snoring or something. A fire was outside my window, open flames and distant screams. Hands in all directions were reaching up to me toward the bed, some coming dangerously close to my hair from the headboard. I felt a tap on my foot and looked down to it when I got to see a pale hand reaching to grab it. I pulled it up right away. I looked in all directions and nobody was there to help me. I screamed, looking around the room for anything, anybody. I finally decided to jump to the door, and I was in the air when I realized that I wasn't going to make it close enough to the door frame in order to escape before the hands grabbed me. I opened my eyes. The next day, I asked Mom if it was common to get nightmares from those things, and she said that maybe it was for some people, but to give it another try, that the body adjusts to them. And even though I knew I shouldn't have, I made the mistake of trying it again that night. I was upset and tired the whole day, as you can imagine, but when it was time, I grabbed a glass of water and just took the other pill. This time, I only managed to get my shoes off before I put my head against the pillow and fell asleep. I was in my room. It was dark outside, but I could hear the wind roaring against the glass. Waves or splashes of some sort could be heard off into the distance. Those screams were still there. I looked around me and the bed, expecting to see some of those hands, but nothing was there. Instead, when I looked up, I saw dangling legs from the ceiling of my room. I screamed in desperation at how vivid this was, and yet part of me knew that this was only a nightmare. I still wanted to escape as fast as possible. I rolled out of the bed and reached for the door handle, but it was locked. Then I saw it. Against the glass was the shadow of a man with red eyes. I started having trouble breathing as tears rolled down my cheeks. In desperation, I threw my hands over my face and fell to the floor, sliding down against my old door, splinters working their way under my skin. I wanted it to be over. I begged, please, no more. That's when I saw something else crawling from under the bed. To this day, I've been trying to draw it, but it was the shape of a large bird, but with large legs and about the size of a human. It crawled out to the floor away from the bed and spread its wings. It started flapping them away from me as the wind it caused surrounded the room. The window was becoming clearer, and the man outside had completely vanished. The limbs from the ceiling started disappearing, and I woke up completely drenched in sweat. Now, without those pills, my sleeping problems continued for a few more weeks, but the nightmares were gone. Eventually, however, the whole problem went away completely, and I started sleeping normally with the occasional uncomfortable dream or nightmare. I still like to think that something out there is fighting for me while I sleep. There's probably no way to tell or to be sure. This was Scary Story, written and produced by me, EDWIN. You can stay updated with this and other shows that I make by signing up to be notified by email whenever a new episode gets released, and also get links to join our Discord community. As always, please reach out to me with your comments or questions, and I'll reply. All links are in the description of this episode and over on scarystorypodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.